out. Coach, Tiki and Tierney. Tiki's out, though. It's just Brandon solo. How are you today, my man?
I'm good. Enjoying life.
Are you? Because everywhere you go, and I say that with a smile, and you should enjoy life. You've had a hell of a career. You've made a lot of money, and, you're healthy and all that stuff. But, boy, Coach Karl's getting a lot of daggers. And I can't say they didn't bring on some of it yourself, although I agree with a lot of it. I'll ask you this, George, start off point. A lot of the things, the main discussion points and all the interviews that you've done, primarily the stuff about Carmelo and Kenny Martin's dad or the absence of a dad. Anything you regret in hindsight that you wish you can kind of take out of the book, or are you cool with everything?
I think what I regret is I said that a comment is about a paragraph long about fatherhood and about single parent homes and the frustrations it might cause my coaching career. I said it poorly, and I didn't elaborate on a subject that should have more detail to what I was trying to say. As a coach, our frustration comes when we don't succeed, when we fail, and not connecting with the player or not getting them to be motivated and committed as much as we want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're always searching for that special ability to connect with the player, and that frustration sometimes comes with younger players, doing things that, we need to. We're not doing our jobs. We're not getting the commitment or we're not getting the attitude that we want, and that's our job every day to try to get it better. I wish I would have said it better. I didn't want to create that type of storm.
Yep.
Because I have a lot of respect for the especially some great mothers. Kenyon Martin has a great mom. And there's been some great stories. I think we've read so many great stories about family relationships, even though they were a single family. And the players have nothing to do. They have no control over having a father in their lives.
Mm-hmm. And listen, George, you know this. I mean, the book comes out, and I'm just a maniacal NBA fan. Always have been, always will be. Love basketball, know it pretty well. So I devoured the book, and I enjoyed your early stories in Golden State when you're trying to establish, one style, and there, to me, the basketball stuff's incredibly interesting, but not everybody loves basketball like we do. So there's a lot of people who take a quote like what you said about Carmelo, the dad aspect, and they run with it, and the other stuff gets completely diluted. But you had to know that going in. I mean, that's what it takes to sell books. So you couldn't have been surprised, right?
Well, my thing is I wanted to express and not necessarily say that it's the truth, my feelings through some difficult times. And I don't think the coach's feelings or seeing it from his eyes is expressed very well, because coaches are the one that speaks about the situations, and we filter out information to kind of continue to have the energy be positive.
Mm-hmm.
But down deep inside, it's our frustrations as coaches that I think the fan needs to know that NBA coaching staffs work every day on trying to get their team better, trying to find a better way to make a star a superstar consistent, and making the 12th man on their roster an 8th man on their roster. And because of that, and then you throw in losing 30, 40 games a year, you have a lot of frustration. And that's kind of what I wanted the game to feel, maybe.
Gotcha.
The fans feel a little bit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So to George Karl with us here on Tiki and Tierney, CBS Sports Radio. George, 6 different teams, 5 different decades spanning this. And, our age, there's a direct correlation to how old we are to how we perceive the world. I'm in my early 40s. I've got one view. You're close to my dad's age. You're in your mid-60s. You have a little bit of a different view. But the one thing that frustrates, and I don't know that this applies to you, George, but just as a general premise, this frustrates me to some level. Help me out. It seems like all the old-timers wax overly poetic about their days as if there was no problems. And I don't mean, when there was the drug culture with cocaine in the NBA. I mean that the athlete was always, self-motivated and showed up ready to. Half these guys showed up drunk. Half these guys showed up tired. Half these guys were holding out for money. I'm curious, all the years you spanned in the NBA, if you had to pinpoint an era, a year, or a year or two, that you thought that things really changed, the way the athlete processes things, the work ethic, the money, what year or two would George Karl point to? Do you have one?
I would think it'd be coming around the year 2000. I mean, I just think the internet and talk radio and ESPN grew into whatever you want to call them, this gigantic media and information and statistics and the internet now, there is so much opinion, so much interpretation going on a daily basis. Every night there's 10 NBA games tonight, and there could be 200 different opinions on a guy playing good, coached well, this guy coached better than the other coach. And it's probably just too much information right now. And I think, and then the money at the same time was growing to the point where players aren't players anymore. They're corporations.
Yep.
Their day is just not basketball. In the 80s, 70s, 80s, and even probably the 90s, the player was a basketball player 90% of that day. Today, I don't know if every day is 90%. I think there are a lot of days. There are a lot of days they're a businessman. There are a lot of days they're worried about other things, and so I think that's what's changed. Is around 2000 you had maybe the awareness that if you have a 10-year career, you can make $100 million, and players started realizing that this is not only a career that is fun. It's a career that can make the rest of my life easy. And so I think you have a lot of habits kind of changing in that era. Mm-hmm. When the money grew and the information source and the amount of interpretation going on a daily basis grew to the point where it's a big part of the sports world.
I think you're probably right, Coach. I mean, now players wake up and on their things to do list, there's 2 or 3 other things. Meet with this CEO, have a lunch meeting. Oh, yeah, by the way, I'm playing at Oracle tonight, or I'm playing in Oklahoma. Whatever. The game is, not that it's secondary, but it's no longer as primary as it used to be. I don't disagree with that. George Karl with us here on Tiki and Tierney. George, let me ask you this. I've got a theory, all right, and it's about Carmelo, and I really want your most honest. If you think I'm totally wrong, I'm a big boy. Lay it on me. But I really believe I'm onto something here. And I just have to set it up quickly. The unknown is a very powerful tool in evaluating players, all right? So I believe that Carmelo, somewhere in the deepest recess of his mind, says, I got all these points, I got 3 Olympic gold medals, I'm a 9-time All-Star. If I'm to acquiesce to a trade and I go to a team that's not the Cavs or the Warriors and I don't win a championship, I remove that powerful tool of the unknown. Because then everybody, his last remaining supporters, and trust me, I'm a Knicks fan and I live here, they're waning significantly. But if he goes somewhere like the Bucks or the Clippers or the Thunder, Pacers, like a mid-level team, Celtics or above mid-level, and he doesn't win, now everybody says, that's what we thought about you. Now you confirmed it. Is there anything there that I just said that you know him a million times better than I do that makes a modicum of sense to you?
Well, I've always thought NBA players evolve into, at the end of their career, they're more determined to get to the championship or win the championship more so than maybe in the middle of their career. I think Melo, he wants to win a championship. And if he's so frustrated with the situation that he doesn't see that window in New York, then he might say, I'm willing and open to a trade. My gut says he wants to stay in New York because I think that's where he's most comfortable, and I think he has no problem fighting through the storm. But that's just an opinion. That's an interpretation. I have no inside information on that.
Yeah.
But I think though I do think players, as they get towards the end of their career and they don't have championships in their resume, they look to how to win a championship. And they're just, if Cleveland and Golden State are only 2 teams on that list, then he's got to take some responsibility to go into a Clipper and make them a championship team, or go into Boston and make them a good playoff team. There are ways that he can still maybe in a trade, even though he doesn't win a championship, he can still have an impact on that team.
You talk about the modern athlete here, and I think a byproduct of that is, the juice that the coach loses. The example, even though I don't think Carmelo's a bad guy at all, I think he's actually a very good person. I just think he's a little selfish and he's a little limited as a defender and all that basketball stuff. But Jeff Hornacek, he can't win. If no matter what he wants to implement style-wise, George, if the main guy isn't buying in, Jeff Hornacek may as well be selling popcorn at the Garden because he's got no juice.
Well, again, I think what you're talking about is something I've thought about a lot over my career. The teams that are successful have serious commitment, and then there are a lot of teams out there have what I call compromise commitment. And losing creates compromise. Losing creates a discussion that sometimes the committed, dedicated, committed team has an advantage because they play with a stronger commitment. And anytime you move to compromise, trying to negotiate a new avenue of togetherness, I think sometimes it weakens your team. And I think you see that not only in maybe what's going on with the Knicks, but you see that with a lot of teams in the NBA right now. This is the time of the year where teams know that they're failing, and how they handle that failure is always interesting to see where, what the organization decides, what the coaching staff decides, how the players handle it. Mm-hmm. All those things are difficult when you got about 35 games left in the NBA season, and it's hard to see success.
Yep. I don't disagree. George Karl, one more thing for you, Coach. We're a little bit up against the time-wise, but the name of the book, Furious George. And listen, everybody's read this to my audience, not you, George. You guys have read, the inflammatory stuff and the stuff that's been, positioned as divisive, whatever. Read the book. I mean, if you're a basketball fan, the meat of the book is phenomenal. I really enjoyed it, George, and I want to leave you with this here. We did this on Twitter for our audience, and not enough time to rip through all the names, but basically we have a picture that's broken into quadrants here, and it encompasses the best players from each era, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. Now, assuming that the referees aren't quite as liberal as they were in the 80s or maybe aren't as soft as they are now, if you had to pick the 5 best players from each of those decades to win, which decade would you pick?
Well, I would probably stay loyal to the Magic, the Birds, and the Jordan era, and then Isaiah fading in. So that would be in the 90s, the late 80s, and the early 90s would probably be my generation of. I think those guys, even in today's game, would be championship players. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I personally believe our players are getting faster, stronger, better in a lot of ways. But there are players, guys like Oscar and Russell and Chamberlain. They could play tonight. If you put Michael Jordan on the court without hand checking, he might be able to average 35 points a game.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff, George. George Karl, former coach, many different teams, a ton of wins along the way, and a pretty interesting book, as we said, entitled Furious George. George, appreciate some time, man. Thank you very much. Happy you came on.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, buddy. You got it.